A new bill in Illinois would make it a felony to knowingly or intentionally mishandle human remains. It comes after a Carlinville funeral home gave families the wrong remains after their bodies were cremated. Months after an initial report was filed, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation revoked the funeral home's license. But no criminal charges have been filed. Lawmakers believe state law is not equipped to handle this legislation.
This should be a violation of criminal law outright. You should not have to find creative ways to charge people. And so we are writing Illinois law to reflect current criminal activity, and I think it will give justice to future families, and it will deter people from committing these sorts of horrible acts.
The bill would make violating the law a Class 4 felony. People convicted could face up to 3 years in prison.